I, this lecture is sort of really not about the exhibition insofar as that this marvelous exhibition, which you've all got to go and see, is only really about his charcoal heads. And because it was so separate, there are a few paintings there, but only a very, very few. I went back a bit on his career. You know, he's still alive. Now, I found I was doing my reading, and I found this really interesting reference to his beginnings. He was born in Berlin. I would think relatively upmarket parents. He comes from a long line of rabbis, I believe, but his father was a sort of patent lawyer. His mother had been trained as an artist. She wasn't really a serious artist, but I mean, I think he was an only child, and the father met this incredible woman who I really must read more about. She's called Irish Ortego, I think, or something named something like that. She was part of that rather wealthy international group, which were basically surrealists of the sort of the 30s. And she was in Germany, and she was in Germany at may I say, I should have told him when he was born. He was born in 1931. So she was in Germany at the beginning of the Nazi situation. She understood the Nazi situation better than anybody else. And it was through her that he came to England. Now, she met his father, and his family, his father and mother, sent him off, and he didn't come with the big one with all the Jewish children. He came by himself. But whether she was responsible for this school, I don't know. But they went to a school in Kent. It was called the Bunce Court, and it was a boarding school for orphans. And they were mostly German Jewish kids. And these two little boys met each other. And one was called Frank Romer, and he was 11, whereas Auerbach was 8. And they became friends, and they stayed friends for the rest of their lives. Interestingly, I believe they're both still alive. Well, we know that Frank Auerbach, and I think the Romer one is too. But he went to America and obviously made a great deal of money because he's important, very important for Frank Auerbach, because he was the first person to buy his work. And he bought his first painting much, much later. But so we'll talk about him entirely. Now, let's have a look at the first. These are absolute, the picture on the left, I think, is absolutely wonderful. This is Frank. He went, I briefly should have told you that after he left the school when he was 17, his parents, he never heard from his parents after 1942. They were obviously killed by they went to Auerbach, and that was to Auschwitz, and that was the end of them. He never saw them again, never spoke to them again, never had anything to do with them. His name was Frank Helmut Auerbach. And in 1947, he left the school and came to London. He didn't have any money, or very little money, but he had, interestingly, a few sort of distant cousins who sent him little bits of money. So he had enough to live on, but very, very little, tiny bit of money. And he was faintly interested in acting. And there was a sort of a left-wing amateur dramatic thing in Hampstead, and he got himself involved with that. And whilst there, he was rather good at it. They discovered, and he was in a small part, but he was in a play by Peter Ustinov, and also in this play was this extraordinary woman, Estella Olive West. She was 31 and he was 17. Now, what we're seeing, the first photograph we are seeing him sitting there, he thought he'd be an actor, but he discovered that he wasn't really very good. And he went off and he managed to get a scholarship to St. Martin's, and he went to St. Martin's. And this is him showing his work at the embankment in I think this is 1947. I'm not quite, no, 1948. This is what he looked like in 1948. And he's sitting in the embankment with his pictures around him. And this is after this, he goes seriously to St. Martin's, which he didn't like very much. And he then went with to the Borough Polytechnic in the evenings. Now, this was very important for him because this is where Bomberg was. Now, Bomberg became his really most important sort of artist to be involved with. And the middle one shows you Bomberg teaching at the Polytechnic in 1947. And the picture on the extreme right, I don't know the date completely, it's the middle 50s, but that is Leon Kossoff. Now, the two children, they met each other later on. They met each other when in St. Martin's, the two boys. And Kossoff, it was actually Auerbach who took Kossoff to the Borough Polytechnic because he was tremendously enthusiastically influenced by Kossoff. Now you have to understand that Kossoff himself he wasn't a fashionable painter at the time. He'd been involved with the Vorticism as a young man. He decided against that, and he'd gone back to figuration. And he literally had very little exhibition space. He was quite successful as a young man, but later on he had great trouble. And so he was a very difficult man. I mean, he was the sort of man that had to do part-time teaching because he got so angry with everybody that he used to tell everybody off. I mean, not the students, but the people he was working for. So it was very difficult for him to survive so he had this part-time teaching job, but he was enormously influential to them. But these photographs, I think, I say the one on the right is probably the 50s. Now, Kossoff was the first person who found this studio in Mornington Crescent, which was a sort of very, 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 I mean, there wasn't even an indoor lavatory, I don't think, but he had that. And when Kossoff, found a girlfriend, and he moved from the studio. And so was taken over by Auerbach, and Auerbach to this day is in the same studio. Well, let's have the next one, and I'll show you. There. He was very good looking, wasn't he? That's him holding his painting of Kossoff. They used to sit for each other because they couldn't afford the models. And the picture on the right, which is in the exhibition, by the way, this one you can see. And this is 1954. Now, notice how incredibly thickly painted it is. Now, at this time, he just kept on painting on top what he'd start and then completely repaint again and again and again. So it is said that towards the end of this set, it needed two people almost to carry them because they were so heavy. Now that is in the exhibition, so you can see this. This picture is him just having just painted it in 1954.
So it was like a palimpsest.
It was, yes, it's extraordinary. It's a marvelous painting, this one. Okay, next one. Now this one is very interesting because on the left, you've got the self-portrait of Kossoff. Now this is 1931, but look at the way that he's painted. This is charcoal, of course. And when you go to the exhibition, you'll see how the influence of Kossoff was so strong, because this is what brought the idea of the charcoals on. And this particular one was, as I say, 1931. And in the center, you've still got, in this case, it's charcoal, of course, but it is Kossoff. And this we're talking about, this is 1956, 57. And the one on the extreme end is the detail. Now, at this time, he's moved in with Estella Olive West. She was a widow. She had 3 children, and she had a house, a sort of boarding house, which kept her alive, in Earl's Court. And he had the basement. He moved into the basement, and they became I mean, a tremendous difference in age, but they became lovers and they were together for 25 years. I mean, it was a long relationship. And without her, he would have been, I think she became a sort of mother figure and the family became the family that he hadn't got, I imagine. What he talks about himself when he says about this, that he didn't really have a place that he felt to be his room in the basement wasn't all that comfortable. And so he used to go around London all the time on sort of uh, buses and trams and things like that. Just walk about. Now, remember, at this point, we're talking the early 50s. London was completely devastated. I mean, it looked a bit like, I believe, that we're seeing in Israel at the moment. Okay, next one. Now we've got here she is. Here is Stella. Now look at the way, what I want you to look at is look at the way the paper is sort of erased. What happened is he regards later on, judging from the things I've read, the drawings just as importantly as the painting. And he goes, sometimes we're talking about 100 sittings that we're looking at, day after day after day. And you can see that in the end, he worked with an eraser on the charcoal, and he pressed so hard on it that he tore the paper. And so later on, he put two lots of paper before he started drawing. And you can see this very carefully. You see the two pieces of paper here. And this is very, very typical. Now, this particular painting is in the exhibition. So again, this is one that you can see. What they did, she was working, and she was an extraordinary lady, because how it worked. She used to come home from work, and she would pose for him, but she said she put the roast in the oven, and then after about an hour, she took the roast out, and then they stopped and presumably ate something, and then went back to pose again. And so she sort of got used to posing almost 2 hours. He only uses the same people for the whole of his life as to work for him. Okay, next one. And here is a self-portrait. This is quite amazing. And you can see how he has worked again and again and again on the paper. You can see the split paper underneath. And he used the eraser almost as a drawing, as a pencil, or you see, he used that as well. The picture on the right is the detail. These are quite marvelous. They were taken by Kabila, of course, and they really are incredible, because you get a sense of the weight and the time that it took to do these. It's unusual. He doesn't normally paint work on himself until the end of his life. So these are quite unusual. These are 1958. We're looking very early things. This is very interesting because we're looking at this period in his life when he was still a very young man. Okay, next one. And here again, I mean, these are extraordinary. Again, this is a Kossov, but you can see from the forehead, you can see with this detail exactly how we were talking. Now, this one we're talking. This is 1957, and the next one is going to be Estella again. I think this is very beautiful. There's a sort of, on Tuesday, they were saying the thing about them is there's a sense of tragedy, a sort of a sadness, and in all of them there is this complete sort of empty. You feel the complete sort of sadness and emptiness about it. He says actually about this, he says of himself that he works on this work day after day, all the time, and sometimes, as I say, sometimes it's as many as 100 sittings. The only thing he ever did really he and Kossoff used to go to the National Gallery and draw in the National Gallery. This is the only time really they left the point. In his life, he's very amusing. Eventually, he won the Venice Biennale, and so he went to Venice. I think he stayed a week. He went to America when Marlborough they had a big exhibition of his work. And I think for that he stayed 3 days. Apart from that, he's never really left Camden Town. I believe he has a flat. She has a flat in Islington. And he does, I believe, move from Islington to Camden Town, but that's the amount of distance that he puts on himself. And you get this sense of these people. You really know them from this exhibition. Okay, next one. This is Julia. Now, Julia was he eventually went into the Royal College, and he actually did very well in the Royal College. He got first prize. He got first class degree, and this is when he met Julia, and Julia and he became a brief relationship. However, she became pregnant. She was called Woolston, and they met in 1958, and she was pregnant with Jacob. They married in 1958 at the beginning, and Jacob was born at the end in 1958. And this is his drawing of her. Actually, this drawing of her is in 1960. Okay, next one. She's very interesting. This one I think is wonderful. This is the slightly later one. I think this is 60. This is 60 as well. Now, this is an interesting relationship. They had the child. She had a flat in Vincent Square. He, by the way, by this time, he actually had a dealer. Helen Lesor saw his work at the Royal College and was so impressed with it that she gave him a sort of an exhibition, and she gave him a little money. So he was a little bit more comfortably off then. He had a sort of security. When the child was born, I think she came from a rather comfortably off family. I think they were sort of faintly in the government. And she had a flat in Vincent's Crescent, and she had the baby. But their relationship did not continue. And after the child was born, he went back to his basement flat, and they didn't. She brought up Jacob by herself. Okay, next one. This is one of these strange relations that helped him literally to survive early on. This is an older cousin, and she becomes one of the people that he paints again and again. This is the head of Goethe Boehm, Boehm, and this is 1961. And this is in the exhibition, this one. This is the head of Goethe, and this is 1964. He again she patiently sat for him, and there are many, many, many drawings of her. I think this is really rather beautiful, this particular one. This is at this point when he was painting, he didn't have enough money for paint really, and the cheapest paint were the earth colors. So you'll see in the early work that the colors are all the earth colors. He doesn't really get bright until he has a bit of money to spend on more expensive paint. Okay, next one. This is actually interesting. This is Leon Kossoff with the head of Auerbach, and this is 1956. And the one on the right is Auerbach, the head again of Estella, or he always refers to this as EOW, and this is 6. This is EOW 6, the one on the right. But the one on the left is Kossoff of him. Okay, next one. Again, this is something very interesting. Again, this is he's got a bit more money. He's had a moderately successful little exhibition, And the color, the color's getting a bit better. This is the same woman. This is the head of a stela in both cases. In this case, it's 57, and this one. So this is 57, and the head is 63, 64. Now, interestingly, I keep on going on about this question of being in Camden because it's really very important. Because this area, a particular area of Camden, which is sort of Mornington Crescent, literally up the road from there, this is where Sickert earlier had one of his studios. And one of the people that he was very influenced through Bomberg, he talks about it almost like a hereditary thing. You see, he says, Bomberg, Sickert taught Bomberg. Sickert was sort of new Degas. And so it goes right back and to the peak. Right, he does this sort of thing about it. Okay, next one, because you'll see it. This is a Sickert. Now, this particular Sickert was a series that he painted. He painted about sort of 9 or 10 of them. And there was a tremendous scandal in Camden Town, and it was called The Murder of Camden Town. And it was this prostitute, actually. And he did this series of paintings of this event. And this particular one was called The Camden Town Murders, or What Shall We Do for the Rent? And this is 1909. Now, Sickert's date, so 1860, he died in 1942. But his particular feeling for thick paint and the sense of sort of the grime of Camden Town is what you see with the Sickert stuff. And there's no doubt that he was one of the most influential people for AUERBACH. Now, the one on the right is one of the very few I'm going to show you of. There's many, many, many ones of the nude. This is Estelle. This is Estelle on her back. And this is 1959. So we're talking 1909 and 1959. And you see the sheer amount of paint quality that is put onto this by now. And these are quite remarkable. The next one is the one that everybody quotes with, because this is Estelle on her blue eiderdown. Two versions of it. And we are now looking, the other one was 59. This is 65. This particular one is 65. And and they're both the same year. This is on the same blue eiderdown with her knees up, as you see. They become remarkably difficult to read. You have to stand quite a long way away to see which is the top and which is the bottom of these. And there's no doubt about it, this extraordinary thick paint, which he uses. I mean, he uses with the palette knife and all sorts of things. You can see how thick it is. Okay, next one. Now, I'm going to move now to show you the pictures that he was doing the same time that he was doing these nudes and these things. But this time he's looking, of course, at Bomberg. And what we're looking at now are the pictures that most influenced him of Bomberg's. Now, you've got to remember that he is living and painting in North London from 1950, 1954, 1950s. Now, I can remember coming to London in the 50s, and I'd been I was living in Hitchin, and I came to London, and I remember particularly that area because I had a sort of a flat or a room really in a flat in Crouch End, and all surrounding me was chaos. I mean, because everything was bombed. People were living in sort of one room, two room, and the whole of London was in a state. Now, this particular picture on the left, this is Bomberg painting in the Blitz, and this one was a particular picture which influenced AUERBACH tremendously. And this is the evening at the Tower of London in 1944. And the one on the right is, sorry, it's St. Paul. No, it's London. This is London. The one on the right is St. Paul's. and it's St. Paul's Cathedral in the Blitz in 1942. And these are both Bomberg. And both Auerbach and Kossoff decided to create, to their painting, they decided to look at their city, and they walked through their city, and they began to do this series of painting of the rebirth of London. Okay, next one. Now here you see buildings being built. St. Paul's survived, of course, as you will note in the Blitz, but the area surrounding St. Paul's was very, very badly bombed. And this is it being rebuilt in 1955. And it's a photograph of it. And on the right, you see Auerbach's drawing of this area, and he became tremendously excited about the idea of the rebirth of London. Now he works very early in the morning. It's very common for him to get up. He starts painting, he starts drawing about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he would go on and work literally all through the day. What fascinated him was the sense that he was watching the builders. He was fascinated. He talks a lot about how he was sort of walking over these buildings, the new buildings, on sort of narrow pieces of wood, nearly falling into the holes. But he was doing it all the time. Let's have the next one. You'll see what I mean. And this one is very important. This particular picture on the left is tremendously important. Remember this one. It's called Summer Building Site, and it is 1952. Now, why this is important is, this is incidentally in the West End. Later on, he says that this is the first time that he began to believe that what he was doing was entirely his. He wasn't consciously thinking of anybody else. He said, this is the first time I painted a picture which was entirely mine. And this is a rebuilding. Actually, it's rebuilding, I think, John Lewis in the West End. And you can see the steps now, the one on the right, they were both doing it. On the right, you've got Kossoff. In this particular case, Kossoff is working in St. Paul's. This is St. Paul's Cathedral. This is 1957, whereas Auerbach's is 1952. Now, this is relatively early. Now, he knows now exactly what he wants to do. As I said, let's have the next one. And here are two which are much more difficult to really understand. You can just about see, but you see what is interesting to him is the actual building of the place, the earth beneath it, the iron, the men working. I mean, the one on the left is building near St. Paul's, and this is 1955. These are oil on board. And you can see the ladders going through it here. You notice the color. Now, the one on the right, I think, is more easy to read. And this is rebuilding the Empire Cinema in Leicester Square in 1962. This was painted the same time as the one that he felt that was his own. The one on the left was 55. This is later, and this was 52. And this is much more easy to read. You can see the sort of the ladders and the actual buildings as we're looking through into them. Now, this is, as I say, he was being shown by Lasalle, and he had a small reputation. Okay, next one. Now, these I think are more difficult to read. This is Kossoff on the left, and again, it's a building site. It's a building site 1962. The one on the right is Auerbach, and this is Oxford Street building site. And this is a sketch of 3 of 1959-60. So this is earlier. by several years by this one, but you can see how they're both. You can just understand this if you look at it. You're looking down into the basement, and then at the back there you can see, you just see the street from the side there, and you can read the sort of ladders and
These are the ladders.
the ladders. You could just see it, and he said it was quite extremely dangerous, really, because he was nearly falling into these places all the time he was working. Okay, let's have the next one. Now, this is one, this actually was a commission. Somebody liked his work and they gave him a commission. Now, he was, as I've already told you, he was going back and forth to a National Gallery. But this particular Titian actually was not in the National Gallery. This was in an exhibition that came on. It actually, this one is in Vienna. It's Tarquin and Lucretia, and it's Titian of 1515. And these two are Auerbach's derivation from them, and they are, I think, difficult to see. This is the Titian study 1 and 2, 1965. And I think they are difficult. Don't you find them difficult to read, Camilla? I do. I see, I think I see the arm in this case.
They're rather
But
impenetrable, yeah.
they are impenetrable, aren't they?
How big are they? Do you know how big they are?
They're quite, yes, they're not wall size. I mean, they're sort of, 4 feet or 3 feet or something, not
Okay.
this sort of size. But these actually were bought. They were privately owned. They're a commission. Okay, next one. But this I think is very interesting. This is his passion for Rembrandt. Now, this is one of the most beautiful references. This Rembrandt is quite small, actually, very small, and it actually comes from a group of pictures on the killing of Christ. This is the deposition, and it's a lamentation of the death of Christ, and this is 1635. This is Rembrandt. This is very small. There's a group of pictures. This is in the National Gallery, and the one on the right is his study after the deposition of 1961. And you can see here where he's using the formal geometry of this picture. His passion for Rembrandt continues throughout his life. He has, I think, of all the contemporary people that he talks about mostly is Brancusi. He doesn't talk much about anybody else contemporary, apart from Freud. Okay, next one. And this is one of the wonderful self-portraits of Rembrandt, which is in the National Gallery. It's a self-portrait of 63. And on the right, as you can see, it's Bacon. Now he's beginning to be noticed. His exhibitions are being shown, and he's a very quiet, private man, but he begins to become part of that extraordinary group in the 50s and the 60s of the London painters. And this is when he becomes closest to Francis Bacon. Now, but Francis Bacon's dates, he was born in 1909 and he dies in 1992. Now, this particular picture is a study for a portrait of 1953. And this, as I say, is the time when he gets very much more involved with the group which Kitai called the London group. Let's have the next one, and you see this very famous photograph of them all having a meal at Wheeler's. Now, I briefly explain who they are. This is a man called Michael Behrens, and here is Freud. There's Bacon, and here is Auerbach, and here is Michael Andrews. And here on the right, on this one here, this is Freud's painting of Michael Andrews at the same time. This particular photograph is 62, and the portrait of Michael Andrews is 1963. And we were talking about this when we were on Tuesday. We were talking about Michael Andrews, a marvelous painter, but almost completely forgotten. Now, he again was an unlikely member of the group because he's a very countryside man. He lives in Norwich, and he really painted most of the time in Norwich, but he was part of this, at this point, he was part of this group. And you know the picture on the right, you can see, is Lucian Freud's self-portrait of 1962. So it's the same time that this photograph was taken. And these are all the same time. And I've just shown you to show you the group that was really, as I say, later called the London group. Okay, next one. And this is perhaps the most famous of all. This is the Colony Club. And this is where they all took their time in the evening. I'm saying to Camilla, as I was saying, Camilla belongs now, what's it called? The Soho something?
Soho House.
The Soho House. And I'm nagging her to take me. They've got a place in Soho. And I got this memory of Soho at the time. We never went to the Colony Club, but June, my friend, did and used to talk about it. And it was really the center of the excitement of Soho at that time. We only went to the French pub.
I wish I could say it's like that now. It's not like that now.
I'm so sorry.
Brace yourself.
Can you see this lovely painting of Freud? This lady here is called Henrietta Moraes, and she was Bacon's female model. Bacon is here. Bacon is here. There's his back.
Bacon.
And this one behind that, she's called she's called Muriel Belcher. She was the proprietor of this place. Now, this painting was done in 1963. Now, again, I've been able. The next one is really quite sad because this picture was stolen. I believe it was stolen from the Tate, and it's still unknown. They don't know who's got it. And it's Lucian Freud's portrait of Francis Bacon, and it's 1952. Isn't it extraordinary? And the picture on the right, which I think is lovely, is Michael Andrews' self-portrait, and that's 59. So we're looking now at this particular group of painters who were, in a way, influencing each other. Okay, next one. Now here, I think, is one of Freud's most charming paintings. And this is Michael Andrew and his wife, June. And that was painted in 1964. The center, of course, is a Bacon self-portrait, and that's 69. And the one on the right, which is absolutely wonderful, is Freud painting of Auerbach, but this is much later. This particular painting is 1975 and 76 and is still owned. I will show you later on. It's still owned by Auerbach. This is Freud's painting of that. Okay, next one. And this strange pair shows you how closely involved he was, because this is Bacon's painting of Freud and Auerbach. Freud on the left and Auerbach on the right. Not that you, I don't think, would ever sort of know that. And this particular one is it's quite late. This is 1975, 76. Now, strangely, you can't ever call him interested in landscape. He really isn't. But he does go very often, almost every day, when the weather's all right. He goes to Primrose Hill, which he can walk to. And he became very involved with that particular part of the landscape. His favorite painter of landscape was Constable. And the next two shows you two of his very, very favorite constables. Let's have the next one. And that they are lovely. This constable, look at the paint quality of the left-hand side. It's much clearer to see than the one here, which is a bit too light. They're both constables. This is the leaping horse of 1825, and the one on the right is a little later. It's the cenotaph to the memory of Reynolds, and this is 1833. His dates were 1776. He died in 1857. But particularly look at the paint quality of this one here, and you'll see how much and the reason he liked Constable so much. It's not quite so clear here, but it's very interesting when you see them, compare them together. Okay, next two, because we're now going to see his version of Primrose Hill. Every morning he gets up, as I said, and he does his drawing. He draws all the time. And this is his, one of the drawings. There are messes of them, of the Primrose Hill. And we're now talking about 1975. And the other one is Primrose Hill Summer Evening, 1974-75. You can see the walk, the path which he paints again and again, and this particular tree, which is a favorite, this one here. Look at now the paint quality has subtly changed. It's slightly thinner. Now what he's changed his style slightly. What he does now still takes months to do a painting, but now he scrapes it off. He'll paint it day after day. He'll scrape it off and start again, scrape it off and start again. So it isn't quite so thick. You actually see the rather sort of cream quality of the paint by now. Okay, let's have the next one. And here you see two of them. And of course, the color has become much, much livelier. This is Primrose Hill 68. And the other one is Primrose Hill Autumn Morning, the same year, 68. And you see it's the same area. And he goes again and again and again. There was an amazing exhibition of this work, again at the Courtauld a few years ago. And this is when I actually saw them all. Okay, next one. They are not in the exhibition. They are absolutely wonderful. This is Primrose Hill in the autumn of 1970. And I think this is much more readable. You could see the path. The one on the right is later. It's winter. It's Primrose Hill winter. And this one is 1980 to 81. Now, something very strange happens to his life. After completely ignoring, really, the relationship, he and Julia were quite separate, and she brought up Jacob completely. He took an interest in seeing what Jacob had become, and Jacob by this time was a young boy. And so they got in touch again. Next one. And this is Julia. This is Julia when he met her. This is what she looked like in 1959. And it's by a photographer called David Cripps. And she was Julia Walter. This is when they married. Now, when she came back into his life again, this is a later painting of her. And this is Julia sleeping in 1978-79. She came back to his life in 78, and they've never left each other. They live, as far as I can see, together or separately, probably, because I think he lives most of the time in his studio in Mornington Crescent, and she still lives in Islington. I believe she's not well at the moment. Okay, next one. This is her flat. This is the flat. This is Vincent Terrace in 1982, 1984, this one on the left. This is her head in 1983. Now, one thing, he only ever paints the same people again and again and again, probably about 5. One of them is William Fever. The other one, there are various people that he paints again and again, and she always, and this is her then. and the relationship presumably resumes. Okay, next one. Because these are absolutely splendid. This is Julia again. This is the portrait of Julia, 92, and the reclining head, which I think is wonderful. Can you see this chin and the back? And these are amazing. This is 96. So with 92 and 96. Okay, next one. And this is a lovely photograph. This is when he first begins to meet Jacob again. And this photo is Frank and Jacob, 1978. This is the year that they begin to be friendly again. And the picture on the right is one of the earliest pictures he does of Jacob. And this is 1979 to 80. But this, I think, is the most charming photograph. You can see how delighted they both are to sort of discover each other, really, I suppose. Okay, next one. These are wonderful. These are the drawings of Jacob. There's a charcoal on the left. But the one that is interesting, the one that the etching is later. And he began to etch specifically with Jacob. And this is 1990. The charcoal is 84. And he has now become filmmaker. He's not called Jacob anymore. He's called Jake AUERBACH. And he's made documentaries, hasn't he, Camilla? You could say more about them than I can because I don't know the films. Well, but I think they're good, aren't they?
He's a filmmaker.
Yeah.
He made one that we saw on Paula Rego.
Yes.
I think he also made one called The Last Art Film, if I'm not mistaken. We can find them online.
He's thought highly of it, but they're usually documentaries, and of course he's done one of his father, there's no doubt of it. Okay, let's have the next one. These are of Jacob. These are of Jake. This is the head of Jake of 97 and the head of Jake 2003. And I think these are quite remarkable, really. They are extremely, as I say, he only ever really does the same people again and again. I've just realized what I want to read something that he says because it's in his web. We go back to that summer building site because this is important. He says, summer building site work from 1952, which 2 yellow step ladders stand amid bold shapes in orange and green, has become essential to AUERBACH's origin story. This was the first time he felt he'd done his own painting, and he didn't know he could ever manage another. He says, I remember it all exactly, he says. I felt I was breaking the sound barrier. I was crossing through, making something new, which I think is lovely. Okay, next one. Here we have Camden Town. Now, as I keep on saying to everybody, for me, he has completely expressed Camden Town. And I don't know what it is about Camden Town, but it's all a bit creepy. There's a drawing, as I say, by all accounts, they all know him. He this man gets up at God knows what time, at 7 o'clock every morning, drawing away, and this particular one is here. And this is Mornington Crescent in 1965. And you do get the feeling, that strange feeling that is so... I don't know if any other part of London has the same atmosphere. I don't think it does quite. There's always something about this. I love this yellow car in the centre.
Mm.
You really
it almost
do
looks
get...
like a sort of circus.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it?
Like a carnival-esque.
And you can see that, the houses are very typical Camden Town houses at the back there. It is really quite remarkable. They are wonderful. Quite wonderful. The problem is, I don't know where they all are. I know that the Tate bought some. And so when we go to look at on Friday, when we go to look at the Sergeant, I'm going to try and go and see what we can see there. I don't know which ones they are. But this is Mornington Crescent with the statue, and this is interesting, and I assume it's here, the statue of Sickert's father-in-law, not his father-in-law, and it's 1966. And I think this reference to Sickert is very important. This is a very interesting one, isn't it? The way he deals with space. I like this one very much. And the one on the right is Mornington Crescent of 1967. The one on the right. And again, oh, that's somebody at the door.
Okay.
Okay, what do I press? Oh, that. Okay.
There we go.
Ah, she's done it for me. Now this is Euston. This is Euston Steps. This particular one is Euston Steps, and the other one I think is still Mornington Crescent. Yes, it is. This is Euston Steps of 1981, and Mornington Crescent is 1969. It's earlier. The steps are interesting. Now, in one of the things I read, he was able to buy the freehold of this sort of you could hardly call it a house, but in fact he had enough money now to have it redone, and by all accounts it's got a bathroom, well, a bath, a shower, and a lavatory, and a place where he can sleep, and it's all clean, but I think it's more or less got as bad as it was before, but at least it's got an indoor toilet now. And this is the steps, and this is Mornington Crescents in 1969, and these become wonderful. The next one, look at this. Aren't they incredible? This is the chimney in Mornington Crescent on a winter morning of 1991. And again, you see these marvelous shapes. The way he describes space is so extraordinary. You see the houses on the back there. I gather that they've pulled the chimney down. In one of the reviews I read about him, he was mourning the fact that it was no longer quite the same. And the one on the entire right is a tree in Mornington Crescent. There's a tree here. And this is 91, 93. So this is 91, and this is later. This is 91, 93. And now we look at the next one, which is, this is the rebuilding of London, I'm afraid. This is power blocks in Hampstead Road, early morning, 97. This one here. And the other one is absolutely wonderful. And this is Camden Palace, winter, 1999. And by all accounts, I remember years ago going to see something in Camden Palace. I think it's still there, isn't it? I'm not sure. Haven't been for a long time. But this is they now, this question of him getting the studio in 83 when he had enough money. He was so pleased because he kept on thinking they were going to throw him out. And now suddenly the studio is his, and he talks about it. Okay, next one.
I
look.
don't know if the Camden Palace is still there. I think it might still be there. It might be on the corner if I'm not confusing it with something else, but it's been renamed as something else. I think it's called Coco.
I think they were talking about it on Tuesday.
But I might be wrong.
I will ask people. Okay, next one. Because these are so fun. They are so special now that we know of his attitude to the studio. The one on the left is called To the Studio, and it's 1980-81. And the other one is From the Studio, but it's his. It's 1992. There's a sense of joy about these, I think. They really are extraordinary. And the next one, at the same area, of course, this is Mornington Crescent at night, 1988 and 9. And there's that chimney again, the chimney too. It's Mornington Crescent, 1988. Look at the paint quality. They are quite extraordinary. Okay, next two. I think they are the late ones. I mean, this is again to the studio. The one on the left is 1903. Four. Now we're coming up to date. This is the studio. 213 and 214. And this is now, has his style changed? Has it developed? I think he feels it has. Okay, next one. And this one is, I think there must be, this is Hampstead Road, Summer Haze on the left. And this is Hampstead Road in high summer. I imagine that these are figures which we can see here. Again, you see, when you actually look at this very, very carefully, you do see this question of weight is what I think about his work. Don't you think? It's sort of heavy.
Heavy?
Yeah, you know, it's sort of, you get the sense of, I suppose I'm talking spatially, really.
Well, what I see when I look at his work is like somebody tremendously in control of color. Like this,
oh, yes.
This one, for example, is very subtle in the way that he's using color to define space. And then also contrasting colors to kind of like then define structures or delineation outlines of space. So whether this is like a wall or a street or a road.
Yes, I think there is a sort of, but they are quite remarkable, really. Okay, next one. I feel we need now. I think. Oh, sorry. Next one. No, one. This is the last one, the last big one. This is the house 2000. I think this is the Islington one, but I don't know. This is 2011, and this is the house 3. Later on the same year. Okay, next one. And here are these wonderful late self-portraits. And these were absolutely extraordinary. What happened is, of course, it came, you know, we had this terrible problem that his people who normally sit for him just couldn't come. And he says, and here he says, I'm quoting now, I'm reading. He says, for decades, the painter and the draftsman had friends and family sit for his portrait every week. But when the lockdown left him without any possibility of this, instead he found inspiration in his own features for a series of self-portraits. He told the Observer that while he'd previously been uninterested in his own face, aging had made it more interesting. I did draw 1 or 2 self-portraits. Before that, I've always felt there was something a bit banal about doing self-portraits, he said. I didn't find actual formal components of my head all that interesting when I was younger, smoother and less frazzled. Now that I've got bags under my eyes and things are sagging and so on, there's more material to work with. To my surprise, because I was on my own and had drawn the first of these series, I've been continually interested. They're completely unplanned and unpremeditated. He said a kind of journal of the plague years that we've lived through. It's a great, and this is Fever talking, it's a great sequence of drawings by somebody who understands the state of being holed up. And these are remarkable. They are acrylic. And there are 20 of them. Okay, next two. And I found this lovely photograph of him. And of course, there's the Freud head. But these must be wonderful. They are all acrylic. When he paints Julia, they are sometimes in acrylic because as he put paint all over the place when he was working, he didn't dare use paint when he was in somebody else's house. So if she wasn't actually posing, and these are all acrylic, these self-portraits. these last self-portraits. They're really, really quite remarkable. It says here that they're 2 foot by 6 inches, and he did 20. And he says that they said they show all sorts of frustration and irritation, says Fever. He says, Auerbach says that he's continuing to create further self-portraits. I've been going on all day for the last 2 years, 7 days a week. Each one is totally different problem in terms of material and what I'm thinking about, he says. And that's it, I think. That's the last one, isn't it?